Someone call Alice, because with today's deck, we're all mad here. Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and we're back with another episode of Blues Brews. In today's episode, we're all mad here as we play Mono Red Madness. I've actually been playing some variation of this deck for a few years now, even in Modern at one point when Faithless Looting was still legal. Although that was a red-black deck and used cards like Alm of the Veins and Bump of the Night to supplement its game plan. This deck, however, has access to 2024 cards, and that includes Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Dragon's Rage Channeler, and Seasoned Pyromancer. The game plan for the deck is pretty straightforward. Discard cards to generate value, and use that value to win the game. Some cards have Madness, which means you can cast them when you discard them for their Madness cost. We also take advantage of several other abilities, but they all do different things, so let's just get into the games to see what they do. Game 1, we're on the draw, and we keep it 7. Opponent plays a Forest into a Utopia Sprawl on green. We draw a Fiery Temper for the turn, play a Mountain, drop Darcy, and pass. Opponent untaps, and plays a Thirsting Roots to grab a Forest. They then play Hardened Scales, and finally the Forest they searched for before passing back to us. We draw Unholy Heat, play a Mountain, followed up by Bombat Courier, and attack before passing the turn. Not the most mana efficient line, but we prefer to discard the Phoenix anyway, so the Courier is better in the long run, and we can hold up the Unholy Heat for removal. Opponent plays an Aloe Alchemist and passes the turn, missing their land drop. Well, would you look at that? Holding up mana for removal wasn't such a mad plan after all. We draw the third land for the turn, and I got so excited I dropped Spyro immediately, not even thinking that Fable of the Mirror Breaker was a better line. Instead, I discarded the Fable in shame to have an enchantment in the bin for Darcy. I attack for 2 and pass the turn. Opponent's turn, they do nothing? Oh, poor opponent. Back to us, we untap, play a tapped Den of the Bugbear, attack with everything for 6 damage, and pass the turn. Opponent plays a Baloth, and its ability says to put a +1/+1 counter on something. So with the trigger on the stack, we activate our Zeus powers and Lightning Bolt it. Opponent passes, missing another land drop. Back to us, and we play a Mountain into a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This one unfortunately doesn't get to do anything either, because we immediately attack for 8. Activate Bombat Courier to discard Fiery Temper and cast it for 1 mana to kill our opponent. This first game against Mono Green was a great showcase for the power of this deck. Our opponent didn't do much, but they did enough to force us to interact with them. But we also got to do our own thing and just beat face, so that was pretty fun, but let's just get it straight into another game. Game 2, we're on the play, and we keep at 7. We start things off with a Mountain and a Darcy before passing to the opponent. Opponent plays a common fetch land that I'm not even going to bother looking up the name for, and passes. We draw a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, we play a Mountain, attack for 1, and then pass. Opponent plays an Evolving Wilds, cracks it immediately for a swamp, and passes. I don't know what our opponent is up to, but deck fitting exists, I guess. We draw a Courier and play a Mountain. We attack for 1 and play a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Finally, 3rd time's the charm. It makes a token, and we pass. Opponent plays a Swamp and passes. We draw a Den of the Bugbear, then with the Fable trigger, we discard Blazing Rootwalla and Bombat Courier to draw 2 Pillar of Flame. Rootwalla then gets cast for free with its Madness ability. We proceed to attack for 3, creating a treasure token in the process. Opponent cracks their other fetch for a swamp before taking the damage. We then play a second Fable, surveilling a Faithless Looting to the top. We then drop a tap, den, and pass. Opponent plays a Swamp, followed by a Bloodletter of Aquazots, and passes. That's a big missile. On our turn, we draw Looting, then discard one Pillar of Flame to draw a Mountain. We then play the Looting, drawing a Lightning Bolt and a Fiery Temper. We then discard the Mountain and the Temper, allowing us to Madness the Temper, turning it into a Lightning Bolt at our opponent's face. This was followed up by an Only Heat on the Bloodletter, which cleared the way for us to attack for 10. And then with one of our treasures, we finished off the opponent with a final Lightning Bolt. Game 2 was a lot like Game 1. They didn't do much here, they missed a few land drops, and they just kind of fumbled a bit. But we did get to show off what this deck was all about. But these last two opponents, they didn't really put much of a fight here. What happens when our opponent actually defends themselves? Game 3, we're on the draw, and we keep at 7. Opponent starts with a Polluted Delta and passes. We untap, draw Faithless Looting, and play Darcy. At end step, opponent cracks their fetch for a Watery Grave and plays a Consider. Opponent untaps, drops an island, and Fatal Pushes our Darcy before passing the turn. We untap, draw Unholy Heat, and cast Faithless Looting. Looting draws 2 mountains, we discard Blazing Rootwalla and Fiery Temper. Opponent casts another Consider with the Madness triggers on the stack. Everything resolves, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays an island, and passes back. We untap, and immediately move to combat to attack for 1. Opponent Fatal Pushes our Rootwalla. Second main phase, we drop a Mountain and flashback Faithless Looting, drawing a Shatter Skull and a Phoenix, discarding the Phoenix and a Mountain. Opponent untaps, plays an island, and delves away their graveyard to cast Treasure Cruise for just a single blue mana, then they pass it back to us. We untap, draw Shatter Skull, and drop Spyro the Dragon. Opponent decides they don't like that, and they mana drain it. Opponent plays another Consider before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and creates 3 generic mana with mana drain. They then play a land and pass? Seriously? Adding insult to injury by not even using the mana. We untap and play a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Opponent once again doesn't like that, so they Archmage's Charm it. We play a tapped Shatter Skull and pass the turn. End step, opponent drops a Spectral Sailor. Opponent untaps, plays an island, and drops a 1/1 Death Shadow. This is followed by a Thoughtseize, which we promptly take the opportunity to Lightning Bolt Death Shadow before we can't anymore. Opponent takes our Unholy Heat and swings for 1 and passes. We untap, then draw and play a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Then I make the immediately regrettable decision of playing the second Shatter Skull. I was supposed to hold this for Fable, but whatever, it's too late now. Opponent untaps, plays a Polluted Delta, and they drown in the lock our Phoenix. They draw a card with Sailor. They clearly like what they drew because they crack it immediately for an island and play a Delver of Secrets. They finish the turn by attacking for 1. We untap and draw another Fable. We decide not to discard it to Fable number 1, instead we play it to make another token. We attack for 2 with the first token and pass. Opponent untaps and gets blessed by RNGesus as they flip Delver with a Consider, which they then cast. Consider puts a swamp in the bin and draws another card. They immediately then play Death Shadow. Opponent draws a card with Sailor, and of course it's more card draw with a Treasure Cruise for a single blue mana. Opponent follows this up with a Polluted Delta to fetch a Watery Grave so they can play another Delver of Secrets. They attack for 1 with the Sailor and pass the turn. We untap, draw a Fiery Temper for the turn. Now we get blessed by RNGesus. We discard it to Fable number 2's trigger and Madness it, dealing 3 to our opponent. They have 3 blockers, so we fire up our Den of the Bugbear and attack with everything. Den trigger would have created a lethal 1/1 Goblin token, but our opponent exploded instead. Yowie, wowie, that game was intense. Several removal spells, a couple counters, and a Thoughtseize. Even all of that wasn't enough to overcome the madness. Granted, they were dealing a lot of damage to themselves, and I genuinely didn't think that we were going to win this game while recording, but we pulled it off in the end and took down Death Shadow. As I mentioned in the beginning, I've been playing this deck to some degree for years now, and I love it. That being said, I haven't upgraded it in a while. I was looking through cards before recording for this video for anything I liked, and nothing stood out to me as worth testing. But if you know a card that I might have overlooked, feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments. If you want to check out this deck for yourself, there will be a link in the description below as well. While you're down there, why don't you tap that like button? It adds 1 mana to the YouTube algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoy my content and want to see more, then go ahead and subscribe to join the Blue Crew today. Once you're done, try clicking on this video here to watch last week's episode where we discussed Karn's caffeine addiction. Or you can check out this playlist to watch some of my shorts.